she sat and prophesied her own death. This particular phase in my life is the most dangerous. My husband is planning an accident in my car, brake failure and serious head injury in order to make the path clear for him to marry.
Every little girl dreams of being a princess. For Diana Spencer, that shimmering dream once felt like destiny, a fairy tale woven with magic and promise. On July 29, 1981, the world stopped in awe. Diana emerged from her carriage, trailing ivory silk that caught the light like stardust. A timid nursery teacher, only 20 years old, stepping into a history that would forever change the world. Yet beneath the radiant glow of that moment, shadows were already stirring. From the very beginning, there were whispers of imperfection. In a mere 13 meetings, her fate was sealed. Charles, 12 years her senior, was burdened with more than a crown. He carried a secret that would haunt their union: the lingering, unyielding presence of Camilla. As Diana waved to the adoring crowds, did she know she wasn't simply marrying a prince? She was stepping into a labyrinth of duty, legacy, and a past that refused to be forgotten. History, it seems, has a way of echoing itself. Just as Camilla's great-grandmother once intertwined her fate with that of Charles's ancestor, now Camilla stood as a living reminder, a barrier between Diana and the happiness she so desperately sought.
Did you try to be faithful and honourable to your wife when you took on the vow of marriage?
Yes, absolutely.
And you were?
Yes. Until it became irretrievably broken down.
When Diana finally confronted Charles, his words struck with the chill of winter. "I refuse to be the only Prince of Wales who never had a mistress." In that piercing moment, her fairy tale shattered. Yet from those fragments, a formidable, resolute woman began to emerge.
And I said, Camilla, I'd love to have a word with you if possible. And she looked really uncomfortable, put her head down. She said, oh yes, right. I said to the two men, okay boys, just have a quick word with Camilla, and I'll be up in a minute. And they shot upstairs like chickens with no heads. And I could feel upstairs all hell breaking loose. What is she going to do? So I said, Camilla, let's sit down. So we sat down. And I was terrified of her. And I said, Camilla, I'd just like you to know that I know exactly what's going on. And she said, I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, I know what's going on between you and Charles. And I just want you to know that. And she said to me, very interesting, she said to me, you've got everything you've ever wanted. All the men in the world fall in love with you. You've got two beautiful children, what more would you want? And I didn't believe what she said anyway. So I said, I want my husband. And she said, well, and she looked down the whole time. I said to Camilla, I'm sorry I'm in the way. I obviously am in the way. And it must be hell for both of you. But I didn't know what's going on, don't you? No, I can in the car on the way back, my husband was over me like a bad rash. I cried like I've never cried before. It was anger. It was 7 years of pent-up anger coming out. Cried. I didn't sleep that night. And the next morning I woke up and I felt different. A shift, a tremendous shift. I'd done something, said what I felt. Still the old jealousy and anger swirling around, but it wasn't so deathly as it had been before. And I said to him at the weekend, 3 days later, I said, oh darling, I'm sure you want to know what I said to Camilla. There's no secret, you may ask her. I just said I loved you. There's nothing wrong in that.
Diana transformed before the world's eyes. Standing tall at 5 feet 9 inches, with golden hair and eyes as luminous as a summer sky, she evolved into more than the most photographed woman on Earth. She became a beacon, redefining what it meant to wear a crown. Sometimes the most poignant stories aren't those with perfect endings. They are tales of finding inner strength when the dream begins to crumble. No longer content to be the silent princess, Diana wielded an unexpected weapon, the world's unwavering fascination with her. In a landmark 1995 BBC Panorama interview, she declared, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded."
Do you think Mrs. Parker Bowles was a factor in the breakdown of your marriage?
Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded.
With just those 11 words, she turned private anguish into public defiance, shaking the very foundations of the palace. But the House of Windsor did not take kindly to such rebellion. This wasn't just a family, it was an empire built on centuries of silence and unyielding tradition, and Diana had become its most formidable threat. In a move that stunned the world, Queen Elizabeth II, echoing the legacy of Edward VIII, who abdicated in 1936 for love, commanded that the marriage of Prince Charles and Princess Diana end in 1996.
Announced from Buckingham Palace that with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate.
And with that, the fairy tale was irrevocably broken. Yet a question lingers. Why was Edward VIII's sacrifice treated so differently from the fate of Prince Charles? In those bygone days, the Royal Marriages Act of 1772 demanded the sovereign's consent for every royal union. By the time Charles's heart turned to Camilla, societal norms and the church had shifted, leaving old scars as reminders of a bygone era. As the tabloids circled like ravenous vultures, every detail, Charles's betrayal, Diana's struggles, her desperate calls for help, was laid bare. The flawless image of royalty began to crack, and with each fissure, the palace lost a little more control. For Diana, divorce meant more than the end of a marriage. It was the severing of her place in the world's most illustrious family. Yet, sometimes, the cost of freedom is the very price of reclaiming your soul. In the turbulent aftermath, as media storms raged, Diana emerged both as a wounded soul and a relentless warrior, turning her vulnerability into armor. Behind palace walls, however, she battled the crushing weight of depression, isolation, and an institution determined to silence her.
I have it on very good authority that the quest for perfection our society demands can leave the individual gasping for breath at every turn. This pressure inevitably extends into the way we look. Eating disorders, whether it be anorexia or bulimia, show how an individual can turn the nourishment of the body into a painful attack on themselves.
What do you sacrifice when you step away from a fairy tale? And what happens when the price of freedom is the very essence of who you are? For Diana, that cost was a staggering £17 million, and something far more invaluable, her identity. On paper, the divorce settlement seemed generous. Millions in cash, an annual allowance of £400,000, and the promise of independence. Yet, in the shadow of the royal fortune, it was but a fragment of what she truly lost. Charles retained the crown's real treasure, the Duchy of Cornwall, 130,000 acres of land, prime London real estate, and centuries of accumulated wealth that would forever remain out of her grasp. Her lawyers argued fiercely, invoking her role as the mother of the future king, but the palace's whispered message was stark. The duchy isn't merely money, it is the very legacy of the crown. In leaving the fairy tale behind, Diana learned that some treasures were never meant to be claimed. Yet nothing cut deeper than the stripping away of 3 simple letters, HRH. Removing Her Royal Highness was not just a loss of title, it was the dismantling of her shield, leaving her exposed, just Diana, vulnerable before a world that devoured princesses. She fought to preserve what little remained, if not for herself, then for her boys. 2 young princes burdened by the weight of legacy. Even as Charles wavered, the palace demanded unwavering loyalty, an unyielding edict that could not be broken. While the £400,000 allowance covered her staff and security, it was a mere drop compared to Charles's endless stream of wealth from the duchy. Diana's future now rested on careful investments and the goodwill of a nation. Then, in a moment of quiet defiance, Diana walked out of Kensington Palace for the final time. With her head held high and her shoulders squared, she moved not as a deposed princess, but as a queen in her own right. The public saw beyond the trappings of acres and allowances. They witnessed the raw strength of a woman daring to redefine herself. Sometimes the most priceless treasure isn't wealth at all. It's the chance to rediscover your own worth, unburdened by crowns and titles. Yet freedom exacted a bitter price. Without the sanctuary of palace walls, every flash of a camera and every headline reminded the world, a princess without protection is prey. Still, Diana refused to simply survive. She transformed her divorce settlement into the foundation for a new life, a life crafted on her own terms. The millions that once symbolized her loss now fueled her passion for humanitarian work, igniting a purpose far beyond royal duty. For her sons, William and Harry, she was more than a princess in exile. She was simply mum. Whether driving them to school or taking them to theme parks, she revealed a world beyond palace gates, one defined by the freedom to choose one's own destiny.
Priority will continue to be our children, William and Harry, who deserve as much love and care and attention as I am able to give.
In the quiet moments when the cameras dimmed and gala lights faded, Diana felt the weight of isolation. Losing HRH was more than a loss of title. It was the dismantling of her fortress, leaving her exposed to a relentless, unforgiving gaze. Yet through it all, Diana discovered something priceless, her own voice. No longer tethered to a script, every choice, every cause, every headline was hers to command. She traded a crown for a power far greater, the power to write her own story. But how would her story ultimately be written? As the divorce papers were signed, a new battle began. Each day brought fresh headlines, daggers aimed at her reputation, whispered criticisms from palace insiders, and a war waged by the very institution she once embodied. Yet Diana learned to dance with the dragons, turning the media's insatiable hunger into a resounding statement of defiance. While the royals hid behind ancient walls, she walked alongside AIDS patients, embraced children burdened by leprosy, and even crossed minefields in Angola. Every flash of the camera captured not just her image, but her evolution, from a fairy tale princess to a global humanitarian. Her power grew with every headline. Designer dresses became her armor, charity galas transformed into battlegrounds, and that once quiet smile evolved into a bold challenge against the status quo. Yet the radiant light that made her shine also cast long, dangerous shadows. Paparazzi roared behind her on motorcycles, relentless flashbulbs intruded on private moments, and fame, once a shield, had become a gilded prison. The palace watched as their former princess outgrew their grasp. Even the brightest star casts a long shadow, and the question remained, could Diana outshine the very institution that once defined her and survive the intensity of her own brilliance? Her legacy was not solely etched in her personal choices, but in the way she compelled an ancient monarchy to evolve. With every compassionate embrace, every gentle touch, she redefined what it truly meant to wear a crown. In the end, she bestowed upon the monarchy its greatest gift, a bridge to a modern world. Where stoicism once reigned, emotion now found its rightful home. Her sons, each in their own way, reshaped royalty, one preserving tradition with quiet grace, the other choosing love over duty. Imagine, just for a moment, if Diana were to walk through Buckingham Palace today. Would she see grandchildren unafraid to show their true selves? Sons living boldly, carrying her legacy. A monarchy reborn, not by cold protocol, but by the simple, powerful act of opening one's heart. They once called her the People's Princess, but Diana was so much more than a title. In a world of polished fairy tales, her raw, unfiltered truth was revolutionary. Sometimes, the most profound act a princess can take isn't in finding her happy ending. It's in inspiring others to write their own story.